Welcome to my channel. Try to hear the latest story.
My name is Elias, 22 years old, and I never thought I'd be working 3 jobs just to afford tuition while watching my dad and stepmom lavish my step-siblings with brand new cars and European vacations. For years I believed my college fund had mysteriously evaporated, forcing me to shoulder crushing student loans. Then a phone call from a long-lost aunt revealed a family secret so devastating it would turn our entire household upside down and expose the web of lies I'd been living in. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how a hidden trust fund and one determined lawyer dismantled my stepmom's carefully constructed empire. Growing up, my life was what most would call picture perfect. My parents, Thomas and Laura, created a home filled with laughter, love, and security. Dad worked as an engineering consultant, while Mom was an elementary school art teacher. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had enough, and most importantly, we had each other. My earliest memories revolve around Sunday morning pancake breakfasts where Mom would create Mickey Mouse shapes with the batter, while Dad read the comics section of the newspaper out loud, doing different voices for each character. During summers, we'd pack our old station wagon for camping trips to Lake Michigan where Dad taught me to fish and Mom would sketch the sunset while we roasted marshmallows. Every night before bed, Mom would sit on the edge of my mattress and tell me stories about her childhood in Vermont, living on her parents' apple orchard with her sister Janet. She described the taste of freshly pressed cider and the way frost sparkled on the trees in winter. Those quiet moments, just the two of us, are etched into my heart permanently. Everything changed when I was 10. Mom started getting headaches that wouldn't go away. Then came the fatigue, followed by unexpected weight loss. The diagnosis was a brain tumor, aggressive and already spreading. The doctors gave her 6 months to a year. She lasted 8 months. During those final days, Mom made Dad promise to take care of the college fund they'd been building for me since I was born. I remember her weak voice saying, "Make sure our boy gets his education, Thomas. That money is his future." Dad nodded, tears streaming down his face, clutching her hand like he could anchor her to this world through sheer will. The night before she passed, Mom called me to her bedside while Dad was making dinner. With trembling hands, she gave me a small wooden box with a silver lock. "Inside is the key to my heart, Elias," she whispered, "and some things to remember me by. When you're older, this will make more sense. Just know that I will always watch over you, always protect you, even when you can't see me." I didn't open the box until years later, finding her wedding ring, some photos, and a sealed envelope that would eventually become crucial to my story. The months after Mom died were a fog of grief and adjustment. Dad threw himself into work, often coming home late with red-rimmed eyes. I'd pretend to be asleep when he'd crack open my bedroom door, sometimes just standing there watching me breathe for several minutes before quietly closing it again. Our home became quieter, meals simpler. The pancake breakfast stopped, but slowly Dad and I found a new rhythm together. We started a tradition of Friday night movies where we'd order pizza and watch sci-fi films, Mom's favorite genre. We talked about her, openly determined not to let her memory fade. For 2 years, it was just Dad and me against the world. Our little 2-person family wasn't perfect, but we were healing together. Money was tighter since we now relied solely on Dad's income, but he always reassured me that my college fund was growing steadily and that Mom would be proud of my grades and dedication to school. Then came the parent-teacher conference that changed everything. I was 13 in 8th grade, getting mostly A's and a couple of B's. Dad was talking with my math teacher when a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair wearing a dress that seemed too formal for a school event approached them. That was Rebecca. Later I'd learned she specifically targeted the conference after researching local professionals who were widowers with children. She introduced herself as a new school board member, though I would later discover that was a complete fabrication. She complimented Dad on raising such a bright son all on his own, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. Within weeks, Rebecca was a regular at our house, always bringing something: homemade cookies, a bottle of wine for Dad, even gifts for me that somehow never quite matched my interests. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, Madison, 15, and Tyler, 13. Rebecca arranged casual meetups where our families would interact, and I noticed how she watched Dad's reactions, calculating her next move. I tried expressing my concerns to Dad one night after the kids had gone home. "Don't you think it's happening kind of fast?" I asked as we cleaned up from dinner. Dad's face had flushed. "Rebecca is a wonderful woman, Elias. She makes me happy. Isn't that what Mom would want?" That was the first time he'd used Mom as a shield against my questions, and it felt like a betrayal. Something shifted between us that night, a small crack that would eventually grow into a chasm. Rebecca was strategic and patient. She'd casually mention financial concerns, hinting at the struggles of being a single mom. Dad, with his helper mentality, was drawn in by her damsel in distress act. She'd touch his arm when she laughed at his jokes, ask for his advice on male things like her car problems, and praise his parenting constantly. Looking back, I can see how skillfully she manipulated him, preying on his loneliness and grief. But at 13, all I knew was that the dad who used to watch sci-fi movies with me on Fridays was now taking Rebecca to fancy restaurants, instead leaving me with microwave dinners and a growing sense of abandonment. 8 months after meeting Rebecca, Dad announced they were getting married. No long engagement, no discussions with me first, just a fait accompli presented over a Tuesday dinner of spaghetti that Rebecca had prepared. Madison and Tyler sat across from me, Madison smirking slightly while Tyler stared at his plate. "We're going to be one big happy family," Rebecca declared, flashing her enormous diamond ring. "The ceremony will be at the Lakeside Country Club. We've already booked it for next month." That was my first indication of how things would work in our new family. Decisions would be made without my input, then presented as exciting news I should be grateful for. The wedding preparations consumed Dad completely. Rebecca insisted on an elaborate affair that seemed designed to erase any memory of the simple, intimate ceremony he'd shared with my mother. When I found Dad looking through old photo albums late one night, I thought maybe he was having second thoughts. Instead, he was removing pictures of Mom from the family albums to avoid making Rebecca uncomfortable. Something inside me hardened that night as I watched him slide 20 years of memories into a cardboard box that would eventually disappear into the attic. The wedding was exactly as Rebecca envisioned, ostentatious with 200 guests, most of whom were her friends and business associates. I was assigned the role of ring bearer, a position normally given to much younger children. When I pointed this out, Rebecca patted my cheek and said, "But you'll always be Daddy's little boy, won't you?" Her eyes didn't match her smile. Dad had been financially comfortable before Rebecca, but far from wealthy. Yet somehow this wedding cost more than most people's annual salaries. Later, I would learn that my college fund had helped finance Rebecca's perfect day. A month after the wedding, Rebecca declared our house too cramped for a family of 5. Never mind that it was a 4-bedroom home that had comfortably housed us for years. She'd found the perfect place, a mini mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in town, with a pool home theater and room to grow. Dad seemed hesitant for the first time. "It's quite a stretch financially, honey. And this house has so many memories." Rebecca's response was immediate and calculated. She teared up, voice trembling. "I thought you wanted us to be a real family, Thomas. How can we build new memories when we're living in your past?" Then she glanced at Madison and Tyler, adding, "Don't the children deserve a fresh start too?" We moved the following month. The new house was undeniably beautiful, but soulless, all granite and marble and empty space. When room assignments were made, I discovered I'd be taking the smallest bedroom tucked away near the laundry room, while Madison got the second largest suite with a private bathroom, and Tyler got a room with a custom gaming setup that Dad spent 2 weekends installing. "You're the oldest, Elias," Rebecca explained when I questioned the arrangement. "I'd think you'd want your privacy being so far from the rest of us." Her logic was twisted, but Dad nodded along, as if it made perfect sense. The changes in Dad became more pronounced after the move. He started coming home later, missing my school events, but never missing Madison's choir concerts or Tyler's soccer games. When I made the honor roll, Rebecca put my certificate on the refrigerator for a day, then removed it because it cluttered her clean aesthetic. When Madison got a B- on a history test, Dad took her shopping as a consolation prize. The first major confrontation with Madison happened about 3 months after we moved in. I kept a framed photo of Mom and me by my bed, one of the few items I'd managed to display in the new house. One day, I came home to find the glass shattered and the photograph missing. I found Madison in the kitchen, smirking as she ate ice cream straight from the container, looking for something she asked innocently. "Where's my photo?" I demanded. She shrugged. "That old thing? It was an eyesore. Besides, Rebecca says we shouldn't have reminders of the past cluttering up our new start. When I told Dad about it that evening, Rebecca jumped in before he could respond. Madison would never do such a thing, Elias. The cleaning lady probably knocked it over accidentally. And honestly, those old photos do seem to upset you. Maybe it's healthier to focus on the present. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Rebecca might be right, son. Moving forward is important. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The photo wasn't just a reminder of the past, it was my connection to my mother. But in that moment, I realized my mother's memory was being systematically erased from our home, and Dad was allowing it to happen. Tyler's theft was even more blatant. For years, I'd been saving money from birthday gifts, summer jobs, and allowance in a lockbox in my closet. It wasn't much, but I'd earmarked it for college expenses, books, or a laptop. One weekend, when I was at a debate tournament, someone picked the lock and took everything $347 in cash. The only people home that weekend were Dad, Rebecca, and Tyler. Madison had been at a sleepover. When I confronted them, Tyler turned red and looked away, but Rebecca immediately went on the offensive. "Are you accusing my son of stealing? How dare you? Tyler would never do such a thing. Maybe you miscounted, or maybe you spent it and forgot. Teenagers are so irresponsible with money." Dad once again took the path of least resistance. "Let's not throw around accusations, Elias. I'm sure there's a logical explanation." Later that night, I heard Rebecca and Tyler whispering in his room. The next day, Tyler had a brand new gaming console that neither Rebecca nor Dad mentioned purchasing. The message was clear. The rules were different for me than for Rebecca's children, and Dad either couldn't or wouldn't see it. As the months passed, I retreated into academics and extracurriculars, anything to keep me away from home. I joined the debate team math club and took advanced placement classes. My guidance counselor praised my initiative, unaware that I was building my college application package out of self-preservation rather than ambition. At home, I became increasingly invisible. Family vacations were planned around Madison and Tyler's interests. Family dinners became showcases for their achievements with Rebecca, prompting them to share every minor accomplishment, while my news was met with polite disinterest. Dad occasionally asked about my activities, but his questions were perfunctory, his attention divided. The divide grew wider with each passing day. I was living as a guest in what should have been my home, tolerated but not embraced, included but not wanted. And through it all, Dad drifted further away, becoming a stranger who resembled the man who once built pillow forts with me and promised that nothing would ever come between us. Senior year of high school marked a turning point in my life. After years of hard work, perfect grades, and countless extracurricular activities, I was accepted to Cornell University's engineering program with a partial merit scholarship. The day the acceptance letter arrived, I practically floated home, imagining Dad's proud face when I shared the news. I found the family in the kitchen celebrating Madison's acceptance to a private college preparatory high school. Rebecca was opening champagne, actual champagne, while Dad beamed at Madison, who was wearing a new sweater with her future school's logo. "Dad, I got some great news today," I said during a brief lull in conversation. "What's that sport?" he asked, distracted, as Rebecca handed him a glass. "I got accepted to Cornell engineering program." I held up the acceptance letter, waiting for the reaction I'd dreamed about since childhood, the bear hug, the proud tears, the "your mother would have been so proud" that I desperately needed to hear. Instead, Rebecca spoke first. "Cornell, isn't that terribly expensive?" She took a deliberate sip of champagne, her eyes calculating over the rim of her glass. "I got a merit scholarship," I explained. "It covers about 25%. Dad nodded a tight smile, replacing his earlier enthusiasm. "That's great, Elias. Really great. We should talk about the finances, though, later." Madison piped up, "Mom, can we go shopping for dorm supplies this weekend? I want to get a head start on decorating ideas." Just like that, the conversation swung back to Madison's news as if mine had never happened. I stood there, holding my acceptance letter invisible once again before quietly heading to my room. The financial talk came 3 days later. Dad asked me to join him in his home office, a space that had once been a refuge for father-son chats, but had become Rebecca's domain, decorated in her sterile modern aesthetic. "Elias, I'm proud of your acceptance to Cornell," Dad began, not quite meeting my eyes, "but we need to discuss how you're going to pay for it." I was confused. "I thought we had my college fund. Mom always said you guys started saving when I was born." Dad shifted uncomfortably. Well, yes, there was a fund, but it's been depleted. Depleted. How that money was specifically for my education. Mom made you promise. Things change, Elias, he interrupted, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. The family has had expenses. The new house, the private school for Madison and Tyler. Their private school is coming out of my college fund. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad sighed heavily. It's not just your money, Elias. As the head of this household, I have to make decisions that benefit everyone. Rebecca feels strongly that Madison and Tyler deserve the best education possible. And I don't. The hurt in my voice was palpable. That's not what I'm saying. But you're older, more independent. You can take out student loans, work part-time. It will build character. I was speechless. The college fund my mother had established that she'd made Dad promise to protect on her deathbed had been raided to provide luxuries for my step-siblings. As if sensing my thoughts, Dad added, besides, your mother's fund wasn't as substantial as you might think. Medical bills ate into our savings considerably. That made no sense. Mom had excellent insurance through her teaching job, and I remembered overhearing her telling Dad the policy would cover everything. But before I could point this out, the door opened and Rebecca glided in. "How's the chat going, boys?" she asked, perching on the edge of Dad's desk. "I was just explaining to Elias that he'll need to fund his own education," Dad said, sounding relieved at the interruption. Rebecca nodded sympathetically. "It's such a valuable life lesson, Elias. Madison and Tyler are younger. They need the stability of knowing their future is secure. But you're so bright and resourceful. I just know you'll make it work." Then, in a move that still makes my blood boil when I recall it, she added, "Besides, Thomas and I have been very disciplined about building substantial college funds for Madison and Tyler. We'd never want them to start adult life saddled with debt." The hypocrisy was stunning. Rebecca had arrived in our lives with her designer clothes and expensive tastes, yet claimed she and Dad had built college funds for her children in the short time they'd been together. Meanwhile, the fund my parents had nurtured for 18 years had mysteriously vanished. I left that meeting with a mixture of betrayal, anger, and determination. If I had to fund my own education, so be it. I would find a way without their help. But I would never forget that my father had broken his promise to my dying mother. The summer before college became a blur of work. I took a full-time job at an electronics store, plus weekend shifts at a local restaurant. I slept maybe 5 hours a night, saving every penny for the expenses my scholarship wouldn't cover. Meanwhile, Madison and Tyler enjoyed their summer at an exclusive camp in Colorado paid for by Dad and Rebecca. College life was a constant struggle to stay afloat financially. I shared a tiny dorm room with Brandon, a pre-med student from Seattle who quickly became my closest friend. Unlike most freshmen, I couldn't afford the meal plan, so I lived on ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and free pizza from club meetings. Between classes, I worked 20 hours a week at the campus coffee shop, another 15 tutoring math and science, plus occasional weekend shifts at an off-campus electronics store similar to my summer job. My routine was relentless classes from 8 to 2, work from 3 to 9, then studying until 2 or 3 in the morning before starting over. Brandon worried about me constantly. "Dude, you're going to burn out," he'd say, watching me down my 4th cup of coffee while highlighting textbooks at 1 in the morning. "Can't your parents help at all?" I'd shrug and change the subject. The truth was too humiliating to share even with Brandon. "How do you explain that your father chose your step-siblings' comfort over your future? That your dead mother's wishes had been discarded like yesterday's trash?" My grades suffered that first semester. Not dramatically, I maintained a 3.2 GPA, but far below the nearly perfect record I'd achieved in high school. Each B felt like a personal failure, a sign that Rebecca was right. I wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough of investment. Thanksgiving break brought a new level of pain. I'd scraped together bus fare home, arriving exhausted after an overnight ride to find the house transformed for the holiday. Rebecca had hired a decorator, and the place looked like a magazine spread complete with a professional photographer capturing the perfect family Thanksgiving for Rebecca's increasingly active social media presence. I barely had time to drop my bag in my room before being instructed to change into the color-coordinated outfit Rebecca had selected for the family photos. "Nothing too wrinkled, please," she called after me. "And do something with your hair. You look exhausted." The breaking point came after dinner, when gift-giving began, apparently a new family tradition Rebecca had instituted. Madison received a credit card with a generous monthly allowance for emergencies and small pleasures. Tyler got the latest iPhone plus a promise that driving lessons would begin soon, even though he was only 14. Then Rebecca handed me a small envelope. "We didn't forget you, Elias," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Inside was a $25 gift card to a coffee shop chain. The same chain where I worked 30 hours a week for minimum wage plus meager tips. "Since you're always studying, we thought you could use a caffeine boost," Rebecca explained, while Dad nodded beside her. Later that evening, I discovered why they'd been so generous with Madison and Tyler. In the driveway sat two brand-new cars, a sleek red convertible for Madison and a practical but expensive SUV for Tyler, both with giant bows on top. "But Tyler can't even drive yet," I said to Dad when I found him alone in the kitchen. "He will soon," Dad replied, not meeting my eyes. And Rebecca thought it would be good motivation for him to improve his grades. "What about my grades? I'm working 3 jobs and still maintaining a B average at an Ivy League school." Dad sighed. "It's different, Elias. Tyler struggles with academics. You've always found it easy." "Easy? Are you kidding me? Nothing about my life is easy right now." "Keep your voice down," Dad hissed. "Rebecca and the kids will hear you." "Maybe they should. Maybe everyone should hear how you've forgotten Mom and everything she wanted for me." Dad's face hardened. "That's enough. You're being selfish and ungrateful. Rebecca has welcomed you into her home." "Her home. This was supposed to be our home, Dad, yours and mine." The conversation ended there because Rebecca entered all concerned looks and gentle touches on Dad's arm. "Everything okay in here?" Dad nodded stiffly. Elias was just heading to bed. Long bus ride. I left the next morning forfeiting my return ticket and spending nearly all my remaining cash on an earlier bus back to campus. Brandon was surprised to see me back so soon but didn't push when I said I wasn't in the mood to talk about it. We spent the rest of the break watching bad movies and eating frozen pizzas in our empty dorm building, and it was the best Thanksgiving I'd had in years. The spring semester of my sophomore year was particularly brutal. I'd taken on extra tutoring hours to cover a surprise increase in textbook costs, and my primary professor had assigned a project that required specialized software I could barely afford. Between work classes and constant worry about money, I was averaging maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. Then came a call that would change everything. "Is this Elias Richardson?" The woman's voice was unfamiliar, but something about it tugged at my memory. "Yes. Who's this?" I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder while trying to finish a problem set due in 2 hours. "This is your Aunt Janet, Laura's sister." The pencil dropped from my hand. Mom had talked about her sister Janet constantly, the adventures they'd had growing up the apple orchard, their close bond. But after Mom died, Janet had seemingly vanished from our lives. I'd asked about her a few times, but Dad always said vaguely that they'd lost touch. "Aunt Janet the First. It's been years." "I know, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry about that. I've been trying to reach you for a long time." The conversation that followed left me reeling. Janet explained that she'd sent birthday cards, Christmas gifts, and regular letters every year since my mother's death. She'd called our home repeatedly, only to be told by Rebecca that I was busy with my new family and didn't want reminders of the past. "I never believed it," Janet said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Laura and I were so close. The idea that you wouldn't want to know your mother's only sister. It never sat right with me. But I respected what I thought were your wishes." "I never got any cards or gifts," I told her. "I never even knew you were trying to contact me." "I suspected as much. When I saw your name listed in the Cornell Engineering Department's honor roll posting online, I knew I had to try reaching you directly. Thank goodness for university directories." Janet lived in Burlington, Vermont, where she ran a successful bakery. She invited me to visit during spring break, offering to pay for my ticket. "There are things we need to discuss, Elias. Things about your mother and your inheritance." "Inheritance I don't understand." "Not over the phone," she said firmly. "But please come. I promise it will be worth the trip." 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Janet's cozy kitchen, surrounded by the scent of apple pie baking Mom's recipe Janet told me with tears in her eyes. The physical resemblance between them was striking. Seeing Janet was like catching a glimpse of what Mom might have looked like had she lived longer. After dinner, Janet brought out a large plastic storage container filled with envelopes and small packages. These all came back, she explained, spreading them across the table. Return to sender addressee unknown, no forwarding address, even though I know perfectly well you were still living at the same address. There were birthday cards for every year since Mom died, Christmas cards, graduation, congratulations, even a hand-knit sweater for my 16th birthday that had been returned unopened. Each envelope bore a different rejection stamp, but the handwriting addressing them was the same, Janet's careful script, sending love I'd never been allowed to receive. But that's not all, Janet said, her expression hardening. Laura left provisions for you, Elias. Very specific provisions. From a home safe, she retrieved a folder of legal documents, spreading them carefully on the kitchen table. Your mother had a life insurance policy worth $250,000. The beneficiary was a trust established in your name to be used exclusively for your education and well-being. Thomas was named trustee until you turned 18, at which point control would transfer partially to you with full access at 21. I stared at the documents, struggling to process what I was hearing. $250,000. For my education, but Dad said the money was gone, that medical bills had depleted it. Janet shook her head grimly. Laura's medical care was fully covered by her teacher's insurance, and the trust was legally protected. It couldn't be used for anything except your education and basic needs. At least that's how it was supposed to work. Over the next few hours, Janet laid out what she'd discovered through a private investigator she'd hired after becoming suspicious about the returned mail and Thomas's evasiveness whenever she called. Rebecca Carson. Now, Rebecca Richardson had a history of targeting financially secure widowers with children. She'd been married and divorced twice before meeting my father, each time walking away with substantial settlements after short-lived marriages. Both ex-husbands had been professionals with young children from previous marriages. Both had significant assets, and both found their bank accounts mysteriously depleted by the time Rebecca moved on. More disturbing was the discovery that Rebecca had a sealed juvenile record and had been convicted of minor fraud in her 20s, a fact she'd managed to keep hidden from her subsequent husbands, including my father. When I realized what might be happening, I hired a forensic accountant to look into the trust, Janet continued. It wasn't easy since I'm not a signatory, but there were ways to track the general fund activity. The accountant had discovered large withdrawals beginning shortly after Dad married Rebecca, first small amounts that wouldn't trigger automatic notifications, then increasingly larger sums as Rebecca's confidence grew. We believe they've drained nearly the entire trust, Janet said softly. The house, the cars, their lifestyle, it's all being funded with your mother's insurance, money that was meant for your future. I felt physically ill. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, not just from Rebecca, whom I'd never trusted, but from Dad, the man who had once been my hero, who had promised my dying mother he would protect her legacy for me. What can we do? I finally asked, my voice barely audible. I've already contacted a lawyer, Janet replied, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Michael Sanders specializes in trust litigation. We have an appointment tomorrow morning. That night, lying in the guest bedroom surrounded by photos of Mom that Janet had preserved, I cried for the first time since freshman orientation. Not just for the money, though the financial relief would have been life-changing, but for the systematic way Rebecca had erased my mother from our lives and how thoroughly my father had allowed it to happen. The next morning we met with Michael Sanders, a stern-looking man with kind eyes and a reputation for being relentless in court. He reviewed the documents Janet had gathered, asked me dozens of questions about life with Dad and Rebecca, and took meticulous notes. This is a clear case of breach of fiduciary duty, he explained. As trustee, your father had a legal obligation to manage that money for your benefit and your benefit alone. Based on these records, he's been using it to finance his new wife's lifestyle, which is a textbook violation of trust law. What happens now? I asked. First, we file for an emergency injunction to freeze any remaining assets in the trust. Then we pursue legal action against both your father and Rebecca for misappropriation of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially fraud. The thought of suing my own father made my stomach twist. Despite everything, some small part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation that Dad had been manipulated or coerced. Could my father go to jail for this? I asked hesitantly. Michael's expression softened slightly. That depends on several factors, including how cooperative he is once confronted. If he's willing to make restitution and testify against Rebecca, particularly regarding any deception on her part, criminal charges could potentially be avoided. I nodded slowly. I want to proceed, but I'd like to confront them myself with you present. I need to see their faces when they realize what's happening. Janet squeezed my shoulder. Are you sure that's wise, Elias? These confrontations can get ugly. I'm sure, I replied, a new determination rising within me. I've been invisible in that house for years. This time they're going to see me. Michael nodded, already planning strategy. We'll need to gather more evidence before confrontation. Bank records, property deeds, potentially witness testimony from household staff. But yes, when the time comes, you'll have your moment. As we left his office, Janet linked her arm through mine. Your mother would be so proud of you, Elias. Not just for standing up for yourself, but for doing it with such dignity. For the first time in years, I felt my mother's presence not as a painful absence, but as a source of strength guiding me forward. The road ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer walking it alone. 3 weeks after my visit with Janet, I stood on the doorstep of the house. I once called home Michael Sanders beside me, a briefcase full of damning evidence in his hand. I hadn't told Dad I was coming. The element of surprise was tactical, Michael had explained. We needed to see their unfiltered reactions, not a carefully prepared defense. I rang the doorbell, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Rebecca answered, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to shock to calculated composure in the space of seconds. Elias, what a surprise. And who is this? Her eyes flicked to Michael, taking in his expensive suit and briefcase. This is my lawyer, Michael Sanders. We need to speak with you and Dad immediately. Her perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her throat. Lawyer, I don't understand. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. Everything is not all right. Is Dad home? She hesitated, then stepped back to let us in. He's in his study. We were just about to have dinner. Madison and Tyler are here too. Perfect. I wanted witnesses. Dad's face when he saw me walk into his study with a lawyer was a mixture of confusion, concern, and most tellingly fear. He knew. Maybe not the specifics of why we were there, but at some level he knew his deception was about to be exposed. Elias, what's going on? He stood up from his desk, not approaching, maintaining the distance that had grown between us over the years. I've recently become aware of some concerning financial matters. Mr. Richardson, Michael, began taking control of the situation with practiced ease, specifically regarding the trust established by Laura Richardson for your son's education. Dad's face paled visibly. Rebecca, who had followed us into the room, stepped forward. I don't understand what this is about. Thomas, what is he talking about? Before Dad could answer, Madison and Tyler appeared in the doorway, clearly curious about the unexpected visitors. Perhaps the children should wait elsewhere, Michael suggested smoothly. No, I countered. They should stay. They're part of this family, right? They should know what kind of family they're part of. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. There's no need for dramatics, Elias. If this is about money for school, your father has already explained. This is about $250,000 that my mother left specifically for my education, I interrupted. Money that has mysteriously disappeared while you've been buying mansions and luxury cars. The silence that followed was deafening. Madison's mouth dropped open slightly while Tyler shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Michael opened his briefcase and removed a stack of documents. We have here the original trust documents. Bank records showing systematic withdrawals coinciding with major purchases for this household and evidence that Mr. Richardson, as trustee, violated his fiduciary duty to his son. He placed the papers on Dad's desk, then continued, we also have documentation of Mrs. Richardson's concerning financial history, including previously undisclosed legal issues and suspicious patterns in her prior marriages. Rebecca's composure cracked. How dare you? Whatever you think you know about me. We know you've been married twice before, both times to recently widowed men with assets and children, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We know both marriages ended when the money ran low. And we know you've been systematically isolating me from my mother's family, while helping yourself to the money she left for my future. I turned to my father, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. What I don't know, Dad, is how you could betray Mom like this. She made you promise on her deathbed. I was there. The silence stretched, broken only when Rebecca attempted damage control. Thomas, this is ridiculous. Tell them. Stop. Dad's voice was barely audible. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking years older. Just stop, Rebecca. His eyes, when they finally met mine, were filled with shame. "I never meant for it to happen this way, Elias." "What way, Dad? You never meant to steal from your own son. You never meant for me to find out what exactly didn't you mean to happen?" Dad covered his face with his hands for a moment, then looked up, his expression defeated. "It started small. The wedding was more expensive than we planned. Rebecca assured me we could replace the money later. Then it was the down payment on the house, just a loan from the trust," she said. "But we never replaced anything, and it just kept going. Because you let it. I hadn't meant to shout, but years of hurt erupted at once. You chose her over me, over Mom's memory, over everything that used to matter to you." Rebecca attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Thomas, don't let him manipulate you like this. We've done nothing wrong. That money was yours to manage." As a fiduciary for Elias's benefit only, Michael interjected smoothly. "Not for luxury vehicles, private school tuition for other children, or vacations to Europe." Dad seemed to crumple further. "She said, if I didn't provide the lifestyle she and the kids deserved, she'd leave me, take the children. I'd already lost Laura. I couldn't bear to lose another family." "So you sacrificed me instead," I said, the hurt raw in my voice. "You let me work 3 jobs and take out crippling student loans while Madison and Tyler got cars and European vacations paid for with my mother's insurance money." Madison stepped forward, her usual smugness replaced by genuine shock. "Wait, is this true? Mom is Elias's money paying for our stuff?" Rebecca turned on her suddenly, vicious. "Stay out of this, Madison. Go to your room, both of you." Tyler, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "You always said we deserved nice things because we were special. But if it was Elias's money—" I said, "Go to your room." Rebecca's voice had taken on a shrill edge I'd never heard before. Neither teenager moved. The family facade was crumbling before our eyes. Michael calmly continued. "We'll be filing for an emergency injunction today to freeze all assets connected to the trust. Additionally, we'll be pursuing legal action to recover the misappropriated funds with interest." Dad looked up sharply. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Michael explained, "that you may be required to liquidate assets to repay what was taken. The house vehicles, other substantial purchases made with trust money, could all be subject to repossession or forced sale." Rebecca's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. We've given you everything, Elias. A home, a family." "You've given me nothing," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my voice. "You took my home, my relationship with my father, and now I find out you took my financial security too. The only thing you've given me is a lesson in what kind of person I never want to become." Dad stood suddenly. "I need some time to think, to process all this." Thomas, Rebecca's voice was incredulous. "You can't possibly be taking this seriously. He's just a jealous child who—" "Enough," Rebecca, Dad shouted, an uncharacteristic display of backbone. "Look at the evidence. Look at what we've done, what I've allowed to happen." He turned to Michael. "What happens now?" Michael outlined the immediate steps, the emergency injunction, the beginning of legal proceedings, the potential outcomes. Throughout it all, Rebecca's expression cycled through shock, rage, calculation, and finally a cold determination that sent chills down my spine. "This is how you repay us for everything," she finally said, turning to me. "By trying to destroy our family." "This stopped being my family the moment you arrived," I replied. "I'm just reclaiming what's rightfully mine." Dad grabbed his keys and wallet. "I need some air. I'll be staying at the Hilton tonight. I need to think." Rebecca's mask slipped completely. "If you walk out that door, Thomas, don't expect to be welcomed back." Dad paused in the doorway, looking exhausted. "It's not your house to welcome me into, Rebecca. That's the point." Then he was gone. As Michael and I prepared to leave, Madison approached me hesitantly. "I didn't know Elias. About the money, I mean. I thought Dad was just favoring us, because we were younger. I didn't have the emotional energy to comfort her. Now you know." Rebecca herded her children away. "Don't talk to him. This isn't over, Elias. Not by a long shot." As we walked to Michael's car, I felt strangely hollow. The confrontation I'd imagined for weeks had happened, but there was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just the sad confirmation that the father I'd loved had become someone I barely recognized. "What happens now?" I asked Michael as we drove away. Now, he said, with grim determination, we follow the money and get back what's yours. The following months were a blur of legal meetings, court appearances, and emotional upheaval. The emergency injunction was granted, freezing the remaining assets in the trust, a paltry $17,000 out of the original $250,000. The judge also placed a temporary hold on the sale or transfer of any major assets purchased after Dad married Rebecca, pending investigation into whether trust funds were used for those purchases. Rebecca hired an aggressive attorney known for scorched earth tactics in divorce and family cases. Her initial strategy was to claim ignorance. She hadn't known about the trust, hadn't realized the money was earmarked for my education, had assumed Thomas was using his own funds for their lifestyle. That defense crumbled when Michael produced emails between Rebecca and the family's financial advisor, explicitly discussing the trust and strategizing ways to access the funds without triggering oversight. The financial advisor, facing potential charges himself, quickly turned cooperative witness. Dad, meanwhile, seemed to age years in weeks. After that first night at the hotel, he moved into a small apartment across town and began meeting regularly with his own lawyer. Unlike Rebecca, he made no attempt to deny culpability. Instead, he provided complete financial records, signed affidavits detailing how and when money was taken from the trust, and offered to liquidate his share of all assets to begin making restitution. Your father is being remarkably cooperative, Michael told me during one of our weekly update calls. It won't save him from civil penalties, but it significantly reduces the likelihood of criminal charges. And Rebecca, I asked, trying to focus on my upcoming finals despite the legal drama. Michael's tone hardened. Mrs. Richardson continues to be difficult. She's claiming your father acted alone, that she was an innocent spouse, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The stress took its toll on my academics. My GPA slipped to a 2.8, that semester still passing but barely. Brandon picked up extra shifts at his campus job to help cover our shared groceries when I was too exhausted from legal meetings and emotional fallout to work my usual hours. You need to take care of yourself, he insisted one night, pushing a plate of actual vegetables toward me instead of my usual ramen. This lawsuit won't matter if you work yourself into the hospital. Janet called daily, offering both emotional support and practical help. She'd taken a leave of absence from her bakery to stay in a hotel near campus during my finals week, cooking healthy meals and creating a quiet study space in her room when my dorm became too distracting. Your mother would have done the same, she said when I protested that she was doing too much. She always said you were her greatest achievement, Elias. She'd move mountains to see you succeed. 3 months after the initial confrontation, the court issued its first major ruling. Based on the evidence presented, the judge determined that approximately $235,000 had been improperly removed from the trust and that both Thomas and Rebecca Richardson were liable for restitution. The judgment required the immediate sale of the house, with proceeds first going to repay the trust. Additionally, the luxury vehicles purchased for Madison and Tyler were to be sold, as was Rebecca's extensive jewelry collection, much of which had been purchased with trust funds according to financial records. Thomas accepted the judgment without contest. Rebecca, however, filed multiple appeals and motions to delay, each more desperate than the last. When those failed, she attempted to hide assets, transferring jewelry to a friend and claiming certain valuables had been lost or stolen. The judge saw through these tactics and threatened contempt charges if the obstruction continued. Finally, with her legal options dwindling, Rebecca shifted to her backup plan: emotional manipulation of the children. Madison, now 17, called me one evening, her voice thick with tears. Mom says we'll be homeless because of you, that you're punishing us because you're jealous of Dad's new family. I sighed, rubbing my temples against the headache that had become my constant companion. That's not true, Madison. The house needs to be sold because it was bought with money that legally belongs to me. Dad and Rebecca will have plenty left to find a comfortable place to live. But why are you doing this? We're family. Are we? I countered gently. When was the last time either you or your mother treated me like family? The silence on the other end was telling. I don't want to hurt you or Tyler, I continued. This isn't about punishment. It's about justice. My mother left that money to secure my future. It was stolen. Now it's being returned. Madison's voice was small when she finally spoke again. I didn't know. About the money, I mean. I thought Dad was just more generous with us." "I believe you," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "You and Tyler were kids. This isn't your fault." After a pause, she asked, "What happens now to all of us?" "I don't know exactly. The house will be sold. Dad will continue his new job. You and Tyler will adjust to a different lifestyle, still comfortable, just not extravagant. And I'll finally be able to focus on my education without working myself to exhaustion." "And Mom?" I hesitated. "That depends on her. If she cooperates with the court, the consequences will be less severe." What I didn't tell Madison was that Rebecca was potentially facing criminal fraud charges based on evidence that had emerged during discovery. Emails revealed she had actively conspired to conceal the trust's existence from me after I turned 18, when I should have been informed and given partial control. She had also forged my signature on several documents to maintain exclusive access. The sale of the house proceeded quickly, despite Rebecca's attempts to sabotage showings by leaving the home in disarray or making disparaging comments to potential buyers. The real estate market was strong, and the property sold for considerably more than the purchase price 3 years earlier. After the sale, Thomas moved into a modest townhouse closer to his new job. He'd resigned from his former position, unable to face colleagues who had witnessed his lavish spending during his marriage to Rebecca, and found work at a smaller firm with a significant pay cut but less pressure. Tyler, now 15, chose to split time between his parents spending weekdays with Thomas to stay in his current school and weekends with Rebecca, who had moved into a small apartment she claimed was temporary until she got back on her feet. Madison made the most surprising choice. After a particularly volatile argument with Rebecca, during which her mother called her ungrateful for questioning the family's past financial decisions, Madison asked to move in with Thomas full-time. "She's not the person I thought she was," Madison told me during one of our increasingly frequent phone conversations. "I keep thinking about all those times she encouraged me to take your things or make fun of your mom's photos. It makes me sick now." The healing process with my father was considerably more complicated. Thomas had begun therapy to address the manipulation he'd experienced and his own role in betraying me and my mother's memory. He reached out regularly with tentative texts and emails, never pushing for forgiveness, but consistently expressing remorse. 2 months after the house sold, we met at a coffee shop midway between his new place and my campus. The man across the table seemed smaller, somehow. The confident father of my childhood replaced by someone apologetic and uncertain. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he began, hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "What I did was unforgivable. I betrayed your mother's trust, and worse, I betrayed you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak immediately. "I let Rebecca isolate you from Janet and everyone who cared about you. I let her erase Laura's memory from our home. And I let her convince me that using your money for our lifestyle was somehow justified." His voice cracked. "There's no excuse, Elias. I was weak and selfish and afraid. Afraid of what I finally asked. Of being alone. Of failing at another marriage. Of losing the children." Rebecca knew exactly which buttons to push. Whenever I questioned a purchase or decision, she'd threaten to leave to take Madison and Tyler away. "After losing your mother," he trailed off, shaking his head. "But that's still no excuse." We talked for nearly 3 hours that day, covering ground we should have covered years ago. He explained how Rebecca had systematically isolated him from friends and family who might have questioned her motives. How she'd convinced him that removing reminders of Mom was healthy for everyone. How the financial deceptions had started small and escalated until he was in too deep to see a way out. I didn't offer forgiveness that day, or in the many conversations that followed. But slowly, painfully, we began rebuilding something new, not the uncomplicated father-son relationship of my childhood, but a more honest connection between two adults, one that acknowledged the past while cautiously considering the future. Summer, after my junior year, marked a new chapter in my life. With the legal battles largely resolved, I moved in with Aunt Janet in Vermont, experiencing for the first time in years what it felt like to be genuinely welcomed in a home. Janet's cozy farmhouse, overlooking the apple orchards of my mother's childhood, became my sanctuary. Mornings began with coffee on the wraparound porch, watching the sun rise over the trees. Evenings ended with long conversations about Mom filling in the blanks of her life that had been systematically erased from my memory. She was fearless, Janet told me one night, showing photographs of my mother as a teenager, scaling the tallest trees in the orchard to pick the perfect apples, always pushing boundaries but never reckless. She calculated risks, then took them with complete confidence. With the trust funds restored and supplemented by the interest and penalties the court had imposed, I finally had financial security. The crushing student loans were paid off, and I had enough to complete my degree without working multiple jobs. For the first time, I could focus entirely on my education. My GPA rebounded dramatically. By mid-fall semester, I'd secured a prestigious internship at Tesla's engineering division for the following summer, an opportunity that would have been impossible when I was working 30 hours a week just to survive. Dad and I continued our cautious reconciliation meeting monthly for lunch or coffee. He'd found a support group for people who had experienced similar manipulation in relationships, which helped him understand the patterns he'd fallen into with Rebecca. "I should have seen it," he said during one of our meetings. "The way she isolated us, controlled the finances, made all the decisions while making me feel like they were my idea. Classic manipulation tactics, and I fell for every one." Rebecca's story took a different turn. The court had ordered her to repay her portion of the misappropriated funds, but without access to Thomas's income or the luxury items that had been sold, she struggled. Eventually, the contempt charges for hiding assets resulted in a suspended sentence and mandatory community service at a women's shelter, an irony not lost on anyone familiar with her history of manipulating vulnerable men. Madison turned 18 that fall and began applying to colleges more modest choices than she'd previously considered, with an eye toward scholarships and financial aid, rather than expecting a blank check from her parents. "I think I want to study psychology," she told me during one of her weekend visits to Vermont. "Understanding why people behave the way they do. It seems important after everything that's happened." Tyler, still navigating the complex emotional aftermath at 16, found stability in his school's robotics club. To everyone's surprise, he discovered a genuine talent for engineering that Dad and I both encouraged, spending weekends helping him with projects and competitions. One unseasonably warm October weekend, Dad brought both Madison and Tyler to Vermont for a visit. Sitting around Janet's dinner table, the five of us formed an unconventional family unit. Not perfect, still healing, but genuinely caring for one another's well-being. After dinner, Dad asked if we could speak privately. We walked through the orchard, fall leaves crunching beneath our feet, the scent of apples heavy in the air. "I found this when I was moving out of the house," he said, handing me a small worn envelope. "It was in the back of my desk drawer. I think Rebecca must have intercepted it years ago." The return address showed it was from Janet, postmarked just weeks after Mom's funeral. Inside was a letter Janet had written to me as a 13-year-old, explaining about the trust fund, sharing memories of Mom, and promising to always be there for me. Attached was a small key. The key to the wooden box Mom gave me before she died, I realized aloud. She said it was the key to her heart. Dad nodded, his eyes damp. "I remember that box. Have you ever opened it?" "No. I tried, but the lock was stuck. I always meant to get it fixed, but then Rebecca happened, and everything changed," Dad finished quietly. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I retrieved the wooden box from my suitcase, where it had traveled with me through dorms and apartments, one of the few connections to Mom I'd managed to preserve. With Janet's key, it opened easily. Inside was Mom's wedding ring as I'd remembered, along with photographs and a sealed envelope addressed to me in her handwriting, with instructions to be opened when you turn 18. I was 22 now, 4 years late in receiving her final message. With trembling hands, I broke the seal. "My dearest Elias," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and you've become a young man on the verge of adulthood. There's so much I want to tell you, so much wisdom I wish I could share from watching you grow, but I'll have to settle for the lessons I've learned in my own life." She wrote about courage and integrity, about finding purpose in serving others, about recognizing true love when it comes along. And then toward the end, a paragraph that took my breath away. "I've arranged for your education to be fully funded through the trust Janet will have told you about by now. This is my final gift to you, freedom to pursue your dreams without financial burden. Thomas promised to protect this legacy, and I know he will honor that promise. Money isn't happiness, my son, but education is opportunity, and opportunity well used can create a meaningful life." Her faith in Dad had been misplaced, but somehow, after everything, her wishes had still been fulfilled. The money had been recovered, my education secured, and perhaps most importantly, I'd reconnected with Janet and the parts of Mom's legacy that Rebecca had tried to erase. The journey had been painful. Betrayal, disillusionment, and loss had marked every step. But sitting there with Mom's words in my hands and her ring beside me, I felt something unexpected: peace. The anger that had driven me through the legal battles began to dissolve, replaced by clarity. I hadn't pursued the lawsuit for the money, not really. I'd done it to honor Mom's memory, to assert that her wishes mattered, that I mattered. In the process, I discovered strength. I didn't know I possessed rebuilt family connections I thought were lost forever, and learned painful but necessary lessons about trust, forgiveness, and resilience. Dad would never again be the hero of my childhood. Our relationship would always carry scars. But we were building something new from the wreckage, something honest if imperfect. Madison and Tyler, innocent participants in their mother's schemes, were finding their own paths forward, wiser for the experience. And I was finally free, not just financially, but emotionally. Free from the constant struggle to prove my worth in a household designed to diminish me. Free from the bitterness that had threatened to define my early adulthood. As I carefully replaced Mom's letter in its envelope, I thought about how often life's greatest pain leads to unexpected growth. The family secret that had caused so much suffering had ultimately set me free, connecting me to the mother I'd lost and the family I'd never known I had. Sometimes the darkest family secrets open the brightest paths forward. The money recovered was substantial, but the real inheritance was something no one could ever take away: my mother's love, preserved in Janet's stories, in the orchard's changing seasons, and in my own determination to live with the integrity she had valued so highly. If you've ever felt betrayed by those who should have protected, you know that healing is possible. It doesn't erase the past, but it can transform your future. The pain that once defined you can become the foundation for something stronger, more authentic, more truly yours. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into.